Hello, today I'm going to share how the powerful conception vessel and governing vessel, the basic core yin and yang of our body, can support you and what they're about. So, governing vessel and conception vessel are the most well known of the 8 extraordinary vessels. They're basically our midline, flowing from our perineum, and the conception vessel is the yin, or the front inside of the body, flowing up to our mouth. And then the governing vessel also emerges on our perineum. It's the yang. It flows up our spine, the outside of our body, the back of our body, over our head and ends at our mouth. That's the external pathway or pathways. And sometimes people simplify it and just think of it as this line with conception vessel 1 points on the perineum, governing vessel, and then it comes up and ends at the last points on conception vessel and governing vessel at the mouth. But it's actually, that's just the external pathway. There's a very important and powerful internal pathway where it emerges on the perineum from between our palaces, our reproductive organs, and our kidneys, which are very fundamental organs for the ancient Chinese. And internally, there's a space between the kidneys called the gate of life, and this is said to be the origin of all our energies, which is actually fascinating, because if you understand a bit about embryology, at around about 2 weeks after conception, we're a flat disc, a bilaminar disc, with a front and a back and a top and a bottom. And we could say this is when the governing vessel and conception vessel first emerge in our body. So they're going to be regulating everything. So how can they help you? Well, ultimately they will work with all of our organs, all of our structures. They relate to our central nervous system, our perineum, our reproductive organs, our kidneys, our origins, and why we're here. So they're pretty fundamental. They are the first of the extraordinary vessels to take on their physical form. We could also say they're the last when we leave our physical body. But all our form emerges from them, and our form, our body, develops when we're in the womb physically, but also we're already feeling emotions. We're already connecting with our mother and feeling, experiencing what she's feeling. So we're also living our first emotional experiences when we're in the womb. And so all of this is very much held within the energies of the governing and conception vessel, the origin, and so connecting with them takes us very much back to our origins. Each of the extraordinary vessels has a regulating point, and the regulating point is either in the hands or the feet, indicating whether we have more of a strong connection through this vessel to heaven or to earth, or to heaven to space, to the cosmos, to our universal aspect of being. And so the regulating point for the conception vessel is lung 7, which is yin, relating to our lungs, but before our lungs develop. And the conception vessel is small intestine 3 at the crease below the base of our little finger, and that is very much connected to our heart. In the 12 meridian system, heart and small intestine are intimately connected. And so we'll be doing some exercises in a separate video for these vessels, but I think of it as not so much the breath. It is, of course, related to our breath as we breathe in, but it's more the bigger breath of life that creates us. Both vessels are there at conception, as are all our extraordinary vessels. So at the moment of conception, we could say that we're drawing in from our universal being, from the cosmos. We're drawing in through the egg and the sperm into our physical body. So it's really the in-breath of the universe that we're drawing into our body, with the conception vessel, the yin, and the yang of the governing vessel is more our expansive nature. And so then they come into this midline, and they don't have a branch in the legs, so indicating it's a much more fundamental part of our, it's the centre of our being, it's the vertical axis. I've done a video of the microcosmic orbit, which is sometimes presented as just this up and down movement, but I'm actually going to go back to, I got carried away with the breath of life, but it's also important to remember the origin of these vessels is inside. It's not on the outside pathway. The origin is at the gate of life, and then it connects to our heart and to our brain. So there's very much a spiralling movement. Nothing in our body is linear. There's a spiralling movement that both for the yin and the yang is moving from our perineum and then spiralling up the midline of our body, the vertical axis. But where they meet at the mouth, there's a spiralling movement down. Well, there's a spiralling movement within the brain, and then there's a spiralling movement down, back to the gate of life. And so that's really important to see it as not just this line on the outside of our body, but really a whole spiralling movement within inside our body, a bit like the trunk of a tree. And conception vessel regulates all the yin, which is more the inside, the in-breath inside of our body. And the governing vessel regulates all of the yang, more the outside of our body. So when we're this bilaminar disc, we already have a front and a back. So conception vessel is regulating the front, governing vessel the back. Very quickly after this flat disc, we curl over into our fetal position. From 4 or 5 weeks, we're curled over, and so very much the yin is on the inside of our body and the yang is on the outside of our body. This is important because the conception vessel regulates all the yin aspects of all of the organs of our body, and the governing vessel regulates the yang aspects of all of the organs of our body. So conception vessel and governing vessel, really you could see them as one super vessel with a yin and a yang aspect, because they both start pretty much at the same place, certainly internally, and they both end at the same place. So it's one super vessel. And we could say also it's related through the spine, the vertical axis, to our central nervous system, which is going to develop from this bilaminar disc. The central nervous system has a more yin aspect, a more calming, more resting aspect, conception vessel, or the parasympathetic nervous system, which is more our rest, when we're resting and digesting, the yin, and the yang is the governing vessel, the parasympathetic activity, action. The conception vessel is said to give rise and to regulate all of the digestive system in our body as well. And the governing vessel is much more about our skin and the outer layers of our body. Just on, before I go a bit more into detail on the conception vessel and the governing vessel, I want to say that it's very interesting, the microcosmic orbit, this spiralling movement, is quite similar to the ancient Indian or Vedic view of the chakras, a spiralling energy along the midline of our body. And I like to think of this as, of course, our body, the energies in our body aren't different depending on the system that you're looking at. It's the map that's a bit different. So there's the map of the chakras, which can be envisaged as spinning discs, and there's the map of the microcosmic orbit and the governing vessel and the conception vessel. But these maps represent spiraling energies, and this is what I very much connect with when I'm working with these vessels. Also, if you remember from the video I did on all 8 extraordinary vessels, we can say that they're circulating the essence, which is very much linked to our hormonal system, our neuroendocrine system. And so flowing through the midline of our body, like the chakras, they're not only regulating our brain, but they're also regulating our endocrine glands, our pineal, our pituitary, our thyroid, our thymus, even our spleen, and of course our kidneys. Or not of course, for the ancient Chinese, the kidneys include the adrenal glands as well, so another endocrine and chakra link there. So, saying a little bit more about the yang, the yin in the body maybe first. Yin, rest and digest. Taking it more calmly, easily, going more inside. The conception vessel is regulating our capacity to nourish ourselves, we could say. And it's also, conception isn't necessarily a completely accurate translation of the ideogram for the conception vessel. The actual ideogram, the Chinese characters that you'll see here of the conception vessel, actually represent a human being carrying a bamboo pole with 2 buckets of water, which actually is representing how we accept the challenges of life, how we nourish ourselves with the water, but how life itself is a challenge. And conception vessel helps us to regulate the challenges that we focus on, that we are going to experience through life. So it's about how we can nourish ourselves, in a sense, from within, how we bear the burden of being human and how we draw upon our inner resources to nourish ourselves. So the water buckets are important because yin also represents, for the Chinese, all fluids within the body. So there's very much a watery quality to the conception vessel. It's regulating all of the fluids, our urine, our sweat, our blood as well. So it will work very closely with the penetrating vessel, which you'll learn about in another video, the sea of blood. And it works very closely with the penetrating vessel in regulating, for women, the menstrual cycle, blood, and all fluids in our body, saliva, the yin. And so it's, yes, how we nourish ourselves. So conception, it's not just new beginnings, it's also how we then nourish the beginnings and how we nurture and support the yin aspects in our lives. So some important points, just to give you an example of how it regulates all our different organs. Obviously it's got points along the midline, and these points are all going to be regulating all the organs that lie, so the lower points are more related to our womb, to our digestive system. As we come up further, they're more related to our heart. A really important point, though, I think is worth mentioning on the conception vessel is our navel, conception vessel 8, because it was through our navel that we were first nourished, through our umbilical cord, through the blood of our mother. And that's an important point both for the conception vessel, but for all the meridians in this area, other extraordinary vessels and other of the 12 meridians, the yin, but this nourishing point here. Conception vessel 17 is the point relating more to our heart. So it's actually fairly logical which organs are being regulated by the points. When you're working lower down, you're regulating the womb and the digestive system, then higher up the heart. But then as we come even higher up to the throat, and this is overlaps with the throat chakra in the Indian system, conception vessel 22, I love this point, it's actually shared with the yin linking vessel, which you'll learn about in another video. Conception vessel 22, just in this little dip above your clavicle, sternum, and it's called the celestial pathway, and it's really about remembering this connection to space and taking the nourishment of space into our body. And when we're born, we come in through this celestial pathway, and when we leave our body we exit through the celestial pathway. And then above this, really close to the thymus gland, so there is that aspect of the endocrine system, but the incorruptible, or the fountain of purity, sometimes it's called corner fountain, conception vessel 23, and then it ends at our mouth. So there's some important points. And so another aspect is this yin aspect of the organs is supporting muscle tone, especially around our navel and our whole pelvis. And so what happens if our conception vessel is out of balance? Yin vessels tend to become more underactive. So if it's underactive, so it's worth considering what sort of patterns you might be experiencing, then there'll be coldness in the body. Yin is more the inside, the hidden, the cooler parts. So you might be feeling cold. You might also feel quite dispersed. You don't have enough yin that really gives you that centering quality, centering through the midline. You've maybe lost faith in yourself. You've lost the connection with the universe. You don't know why you're here. You're very dispersed. You're likely to have issues with menstrual cycles. I mentioned that. So a lack of movement in the menstrual cycle, maybe not having enough blood energy. That's an important thing with Chinese medicine. So difficulty really with the menstrual period. The menstrual cycle is much more complex than just the conception vessel, and I have a separate video on that. But the yin aspect is that we can't conceive, we can't nourish a new beginning. So it's an important vessel to work with if you're wanting to support fertility, infertility issues. Sometimes it's overactive, and then there'll be a lot of tension in the body, a lack of receptivity, a pushing on, and a not listening to the more inner aspects of ourselves. I have an affirmation for the conception vessel, which is that I nourish myself from within, and I'm able to nourish myself so that I can support and nurture new beginnings in my life. It's really about how we can support beginnings. And it's called the Renmai in Chinese medicine, and I like to call it the vessel of self-nourishment as well as the sea of yin, because it's self-nourishment. Some people talk about it as the vessel of bonding, but I relate that a lot more to the penetrating vessel, and I'll explain why in another video. Conception vessel isn't so anchored to the earth. It's got a much lighter quality, and it's really about nourishing from within, and the most yin drawing upon our most inner capacities in life. So the governing vessel is the other side of that. It's much more the yang, which is the outer side of our body, the yang aspects of our organs. It's how we initiate action, how we initiate it in a more yang way. It's not how we nourish the new beginnings, it's how we take a new beginning. When we're beginning something, it's the end of a cycle. So the yang is much more about how we can take a decision and let go of a cycle and initiate action and initiate separation. So it's the yang aspect of the central nervous system. So it's that capacity more of action. It's mobilizing action. It's a much more outer moving. The yin is more inner and self-nourishment. The yang is the action. Like the sun and the moon. The sun is much more active and we do more things during the day, and the moon is when we rest. So it's how we mobilize our resources to take action. But of course it needs to be supported by the yin. If we're not properly nourished, then how can we take action because we don't have the proper resources within. And then we can take action, and then we can separate from things. So we could say it's the yang. I talked about lung 7 and the yin, the in-breath of the universe coming in, and it's the yang that allows us to separate from the universe. It's the yang when we're born, at the end of pregnancy, when we emerge, that enables us to separate from our mother, the cutting of the umbilical cord, the coming into our separate identity when we're not connected intimately to our mother. So it's the parasympathetic, the sympathetic nervous system, the action, fight and flight, but just actually being more in the world. And the whole of the spine, both vessels relate to bones, but anything to do with your spine, the actual vertebrae of the spine, because that's more the yang aspect. The conception vessel is more the fluid, the cerebral spinal fluid. The yang is more the outer part of the spine. So when I have anybody that has issues with their spine, prolapse of disc, anything to do with the spine, arthritis, basic core posture as well. That's very much about, core posture is dependent on our spine and the movements and strength of our spine. So that for an infant that has been born, they spend their first year learning how to stand upright. But it's the spine that has to be strong before we can develop strength in our feet. If we don't have a strong vertical axis centre, then we can't hold ourselves well, and we'll have a poor posture. We'll slump. We might slump in. I've already said one of the most important points of the governing vessel, Ming Men, between the second and the third lumbar vertebrae. We often see that's an issue with people in their posture, collapsing in the lumbar spine. And if you're collapsed in the lumbar spine, then that's going to affect all the other vertebrae. We may have a rounding in the upper back, hyperkyphosis. We may have blocking in the neck. And therefore, especially around the 7th cervical vertebrae, if we're blocked in our neck, how can we see our way forward to take action? So if you see someone that's really collapsing, then you know that they haven't got enough strong yang energy to go forward. Because the meaning of the ideogram, the Chinese character of the governing vessel, is actually pretty much that, the governor. The governor, the overall regulator of the body, in that sense of governing and deciding when to act, when to mobilize. But it's not the supreme commander. You have to remember the supreme commander is probably the space and why we're here. And the female equivalent is the governess in the palace. So the affirmation I have for the governing vessel is, I am aligned with my destiny. I'm in command of myself, and I can take appropriate action in every situation, and I can protect myself. So it can be overly active, and then we become overly rigid. Our spine becomes tight, and we can't adapt to situations. We're overly full of ourselves, and we think we know best with everything, and we can't, like the governor needs information from other people to take appropriate action. But if it's overly rigid, we may be taking inappropriate action, and we may have issues with tightness in the spine, vertebral problems, and lack of capacity to too much action and not enough balance with rest. It's yang, so it's more likely to go into overactivity, and the yin, that it can be underactive, which means it's somebody that has kind of got no sense of purpose in their life, no capacity for action. They can't get up and go. They're kind of flopped over in a poor posture, more with yin, and the underactive. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour of the governing and the conception vessel, and lots to ponder about. Some of the most important points of governing vessel are the highest point, the 100 points of meeting, and our connection to the yang, Ming Men, and some points at the base of the skull which connect us with our soul purpose. So thank you very much for listening to this, and connect to your source. I am the source, and I connect you to the source. That is the affirmation for both.